أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ غدوت من أهلك تبرئ المؤمنين مقاعد للقتال والله سميع عليم إذ همت طائفتان منكم أن تفشلا والله وليهما وعلى الله فليتوكل المؤمنون ولقد نصركم الله ببدر وأنتم أذلة فاتقوا الله لعلكم تشكرون إذ تقول للمؤمنين ألن يكفيكم أن يمدكم ربكم بثلاثة آلاف من الملائكة منزلين بثلاثة آلاف من الملائكة منزلين بلى إن تصبروا وتتقوا ويعطوكم من فورهم هذا يمددكم ربكم بخمسة آلاف من الملائكة مسومين. And remember when thou didst go forth early in the morning from thy household, assigning to the believers their positions for battle. And Allah is all-hearing, all-knowing. When two parties from among you thought of showing cowardice, although Allah was their friend, and upon Allah should the believers rely. And Allah had already helped you at Badr when you were weak. So take Allah for your protector that you may be grateful. When thou didst say to the believers, will it not suffice you that your Lord should help you with 3,000 angels sent down from on high? Ye, if you be steadfast and righteous, and they come upon you immediately in hot haste, your Lord will help you with 5,000 angels attacking vehemently. I stopped here, but I think the ruku runs on, so I will finish the ruku. وَمَا جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بُشْرَى لَكُمْ وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ قُلُوبُكُمْ بِهِ وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ لِيَقْطَعَ طَرَفًا مِنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَيَكْبِتَهُمْ فَيَنْقَلِبُوا خَائِبِينَ لَيْسَ لَكَ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ شَيْءٌ أَوْ يَتُوبَ عَلَيْهِمْ أَوْ يُعَذِّبَهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ ظَالِمُونَ وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ يَغْفِرُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيُعَذِّبُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And Allah has made it only as glad tidings for you, and to put your hearts at rest thereby. And help comes from Allah alone, the mighty, the wise. This will be that He might cut off a part of the disbelievers or abase them so that they might go back frustrated. It is none of thy concern whether He may turn to them in mercy or punish them for they are wrongdoers. I think the translation is slightly different from how I would make it, so that is why it's difficult sometimes to keep the flow. I would have translated it otherwise. It is none of thy concern. That is, stop. Whether He, that is Allah, may turn to them in mercy or punish them. For they are wrongdoers is perhaps not the correct translation. It should be, they will remain to be wrongdoers either way. فإنهم ظالمين. This was the verse. فإنهم ظالمون. It indicates that either way, whether Allah forgives them or does not forgive them, they remain to be wrongdoers, and if Allah forgives them, that would not indicate that they were not wrongdoers. But the matter of decision does not rest with you, nor it is with God. So because one has a different translation in mind than what one reads, sometimes the flow is broken. That is my explanation of why sometimes I have to stop and change the stress again. Now let's turn to the first verse. But before that, I was reminded by Mr. Munir Javed that the last verse of the previous ruku was not fully dealt with before we finished, and part of it remained unexplained. So he suggested that instead of starting from the new ruku, I should go back to that verse and start from there. So that is what I am going to do. إِن يَمْسَسْكُمْ حَسَنَةٌ تَسُؤْهُمْ وَإِن تُصِبْكُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَفْرَحُوا بِهَا. This part already I have dealt with. وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ كَيْدُهُمْ شَيْئًا إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ مُحِيطٌ. Perhaps this is the second bit of the verse which Mr. Munir Javed had in mind, that I have not properly explained it. But also I should like to discuss the word kad, which has been used here. La yadurrukum kaiduhum shay'a. Their conspiracies and plots will not hurt you much or any. Allah will save you from that. This is the part from which I begin the commentary today. The word kad means khadahu wa makara bihi, to deceive someone. That means he deceived someone or conspired against him. Also, the word kad is used with good sense instead of being used in the bad sense only. To tell someone the tactics, to teach someone the tactics and the art of fighting and defeating the enemy is also used in good sense. Allamahul kaida, the Arabs say, that he taught him the war tactics, or to defeat the enemy, the art of defeating the enemy. And in the same sense, according to some commentators, the Holy Quran has used the word in Surah Yusuf, وَعَلَّمَهُ الْكَيْدَ, in the verse كَذَلِكَ كِدْنَا لِيُوسُف, Allah says, this is how we Kidna here he should be translated as planned. But it's not just planned. The basic sense of the word does not come in the planning alone. This is how we devise the strategy to fulfill the objective. This is the meaning. This is how we planned that the objective of Yusuf should be obtained and achieved without without breaking the law. So a stratagem is the right word for the right translation of the word kad here in this context. This was our stratagem to bypass the law without breaking it. Also, kada is sometimes used in the meaning, in the sense of warring or battling. Or also to think ill of, I mean to do ill to others. Also, al-makru wal-khubthu, the worst type of plotting, evil plotting against others. Now, with this explanation of the word kaid, let's turn to the verse once again. إن تمسسكم حسنة تسؤهم وإن تصبكم سيئة يفرحوا بها. When some good touches you, or you receive a portion of something good, it hurts them. وَإِن تُصِبْكُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَفْرَحُوا بِهَا. And when calamity befalls you fully, overtakes you, then they are truly happy. وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ كَيْدُهُمْ شَيْئًا. But if you show patience or observe patience and fear Allah, then their plots against you, their conspiracies against you will not hurt you much. Inna Allaha bima ya'maluna muhit. God is encompassing all that they do. Here the question arises as to how will Allah save the Muslims from their plots and conspiracies. Are they instructed not to move a finger against the enemy's plots and rest in sleep without caring for their defense, or something else is meant here? So the fact is that this portion of advice applies only to such situations where the Muslims are unaware of what is being hatched against them. As far as the knowledge of the plot is concerned, the Holy Quran does not advise the Muslims to sit idle without doing anything. That meaning would be contradictory to the other injunctions of the Holy Quran, which clearly state that you should always be on guard against enemy attacks. Warabitu means that show your readiness at the borders. Let not the enemy penetrate into your territories. So be ready at the borders to meet the challenges from the enemy. So this teaching is apparently contradictory to this verse if we understand this in the sense that God tells us not to do anything, just sit idle and wait for the enemy, whatever she does, it does, and let Allah handle the affairs altogether. I don't think this is the connotation of the word or the message of the verse. This means that there are situations when you know that the enemy is always plotting against you and conspiring against you, and the uneasy Cold War continues, but you don't exactly know what's happening. In that case, we advise you only to show patience, perseverance, and move with fear of God. In whatever you do, keep fear of God as the guiding light for you, for your actions. Don't transgress that. Retaliate within the four walls of the fear of Allah. Now, this in fact refers to the previous verse where it is said, وَمَا تُخْفِي صُدُورُهُمْ أَكْبَرُ. Whatever their bosoms hide, that is much worse than what they have shown by way of expressing their hostilities. So as far as the expressed hostilities are concerned, Allah does not advise us to sit idle without planning to defend. But what about what the bosoms hide within them? What is unsaid? On that Allah assures us that because it is not just a battle between you and your enemy, it is a battle between you and God on one side and the enemy on the other side. So there are two parts to it. You can only defend the cause of Islam to your capacity, of course, to your own capabilities, to as much as you know the plans and conspiracies of the enemies against you. That part which is unknown, leave that to Allah. And we will see to it and show it to you that we know how to defend you against such attacks as come from unseen quarters, from unknown areas and directions. Inna Allah bima ya'maluna muhit. This further gives strength to this interpretation. Allah says, you don't know, but Allah not only knows them, but encompasses, surrounds not only what is passing in their hearts, but all their actions. So what hurts is not what is passing in the heart. What hurts is the expression and translation of those ill intentions into actions. So Allah says that Allah does not only know what is passing in their heart, that should not be enough to give you satisfaction. Allah encompasses and surrounds all their actions. So whenever they express their ill will towards you into any hostile action, because Allah surrounds them, so you have nothing to fear. But at the same time, from the plots which become known to you, you must take preventive measures and try to protect yourself. Again, help would come from God, of course, as is followed in the following verses. Also, this verse has a relationship with the following verses, but I'll explain that later on. وَإِذْ غَدَوْتَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ تُبَوِّئُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ مَقَاعِدَ لِلْقِتَالِ وَاللَّهُ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. And remember when thou didst go forth early in the morning from thy household, assigning to the believers their position for the battle, and Allah is all hearing, all knowing. But I am checking my notes lest I might have forgotten to mention something worthy of mention regarding the previous verse. Then I'll turn to the second one again. There is one little point which has been discussed by most classical interpretations, the books of commentary, which is the usage of the word massa. The Holy Quran uses وَإِن تَمْسَسْكُمْ حَسَنَةٌ. If good reaches you, or if massa means to touch somebody, and the asaba on the other hand means something has fully reached something and occupied it or befallen it. So the commentators have gone into the discussion of the various usages of the two words massa or asaba, and all are agreed that the word asaba can be used both to explain good things as well as bad things, to express some any good which the Muslims achieve, any success which the Muslims achieve, any source of happiness which let me say, not source of happiness, anything which you attain in life which generates satisfaction and happiness can be described by the word aswaba, as well as all calamities which befall anybody can be expressed by the same word aswaba. But the word aswaba has the connotation of full force, deliverance of something with full force. So when something reaches somebody, when you say, explain it by the word aswaba, it means the full message has been delivered, the full effect has been delivered. But when you express the same thing by the word massa, although the word massa also is used in good connotations as well as bad connotations, but massa here means not the full deliverance of something, but only something touching upon the borders or periphery. So with this connotation in mind, they say, in tamsaskum hasanatun means even if you gain something ever so slightly, they are deeply hurt, but they are not happy if just a calamity touches you. They are only happy when the calamity befalls you and overtakes you and destroys you and overwhelms you. So as far as the happiness at your calamities is concerned, they are not happy if you are just injured on the periphery, on the outside. You must be deeply hurt to make them happy. But even if you are very slightly pleased, that would hurt them. So this is why two different words are used for two different situations. As I said, the word kad here is used with reference to the enemy's planning and plotting against the Muslims, but this has also been used by God elsewhere to indicate that God also counterplans. And why it is said that you should rest in peace, nothing would happen to you, the answer to this is given in another verse which reads, innahum yakiduna kadam wa akidu kada famahilil kafirina amhilhum ruwada, that they are planning against you and the plotting against you, and you are not, but I am. I have taken notice of this. So you don't worry, not because everything will turn out to be good, but because God is worrying for you. God is taking the trouble of, we shouldn't say the word God is taking the trouble, but God has taken into his own hands to counterplan on behalf of the Muslims. So when word kad is used with reference to God, or makar is used with reference to God, it always must mean counter planning and counter plotting, not a plot which emanates from God himself, but which is always in answer to the enemy's plotting or planning. So that is about this verse for the time being. Now the second verse is غَدَوْتَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ تُبَوِّئُ, has also generated a controversy among various commentators as to what event is referred to which battle this verse is applied, and what is the time and date expressed in this verse. The word ghadawta is taken from the word ghada. The word ghada has the meaning of the morning, anything you do in the morning is expressed with the word ghada. Also, al-ghad means tomorrow, the day to yet to dawn. So, the word ghadota here is understood by some to mean that Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam went forth in the morning, early in the morning, to show the Muslims the places where they should, the places which they should occupy in the battle array. And this must have taken place early in the morning on the day of Uhud. But the question whether this verse applies to Uhud or some other places, some other battle, also is debatable. But most scholars are agreed that this verse refers to the battle of Uhud. But the problem is that Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam most certainly left for the battlefield on Friday afternoon after saying his Friday prayer. So the word ghadawta could not apply, could not be understood to mean his departure from his family in the morning. What happened was that Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam left for the battlefield of Uhud in the afternoon of Friday and spent the night somewhere between the field which he had decided to occupy to confront the enemy. And next morning he reached the place in mind. And what happened, what is described in the verse was in fact the activity of the next morning. But here there is another little problem, that the verse says, وَإِذْ غَدَوْتَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ, when you left in the morning or got separated in the morning from your family. And the scholars say that because next morning when he was showing the places where the Muslims should occupy during the battle, during that period he had already left the family by 24 hours or so, 20 hours or so. So there was no family to separate from. So this word cannot mean when during the morning you left your family and started showing the places the Muslims warriors should occupy during the battle. So the answer to this, which generally is reached, is that in Arabic, Ghadawta is not necessarily used to indicate an action in the morning. Though most often than not, the word Ghadawta would indicate a journey or any action in the morning, but it also applies to other periods of time, periods of the day. So just an action is carried out, and an Arab would say, according to some scholars, express this by the word ghada. So the morning is not necessary. The others attempt to make a compromise. They say, of course, the battlefields were shown, the battle places were shown during the morning. There is no doubt about it, though next morning. So the word Ghadawta started taking shape in the afternoon of Jummah and got consummated in the next morning when Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam started showing telling the Muslim warriors where each one should sit or stand to fight. Now, before I proceed further, let me tell you in brief what happened on the day of Uhud. It is a very important and a very epoch-making event in the Muslim history, and it is very deep in, very rich in different messages and lessons for the Muslims to follow and to understand. The Battle of Uhud is understood to be a direct result of the devastating defeat the Muslims had inflicted on the army, the invading army of Meccans on the day of Badr. Although all the odds were against the Muslims, yet the invading army was devastated. And the Orientalists, although they frantically tried to give some explanation of what happened and how it happened, like Montgomery Watt seems to be on the edge of his senses to somehow come out with some explanation. He, along with all the other Orientalists, totally fails. They have to admit, and Montgomery Watt himself admits in so many words, that almost all the warriors and leaders worth the name from among the Meccans were destroyed and killed during that day. And he admits, though of course with some clever deceptions, that the invading army was larger in number, but through some cunning devices of his own, he makes the difference, tries to lessen the difference between the two parties by saying, after all, some of them had left, they were not 1,000, they were just 600 or thereabout, and they were older people. All that is just hocus pocus and fake, just a concoction of his imagination. Well, the hard facts of history tell us that they were renowned warriors, well clad, well armed, well mounted, who attacked a sort of army from the Muslim side, which included older men, ill people, one-legged persons, children, etc., etc. But he fails to understand what happened, how it happened. So that was the most devastating defeat at the hands of a very small, ill-arranged army of the Muslims, which kept hurting the Arab Meccans. Abu Sufyan, who was leading the caravan from of merchandise from Syria back to Mecca, and that caravan it was which initiated the Battle of Badr, that became instrumental in that, but that's a long story, I will not go into that. Because he had changed his route and made it to Dithar, instead of passing closer to Medina, he had gone to the sea line, and along the shore he evaded confrontation with the Muslims, so he had reached safely back home to Mecca. So that is how he was saved. So after the defeat of Badr, the one leader worth the name was Abu Sufyan, and there was another up-and-coming leader by the name of Safwan, who also vied with Abu Sufyan for leadership. But all the other leaders worth the song of Meccans were completely demolished and destroyed on the Battle of Badr. To take their revenge, Abu Sufyan was just dying and burning, and he was absolutely agonized, and it was he who kept the flame of revenge alive. It was he who declared to the Meccans that no mournings, because we have yet to take our revenge, and told them that all the profit from that great caravan with rich merchandise from Syria would be entirely devoted to the preparation of the battle. So that is how the Battle of Uhud was being looked at and prepared for by the enemy camp at Mecca. Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam was of course expecting such an attack, but nothing could be done about it. So in 1 year, Abu Sufyan, 2 years time, Battle of Uhud was in 1 year's time, because Badr took place in the second year, sometime late in the second year, and incidentally the Battle of Badr took place during the March, this month we are passing through, and it was in the middle of March. But Battle of Uhud took place in the end of March, on the 31st of March to be exact. So they took almost 1 year to prepare for their revenge. It is quoted that they brought 3,000 warriors, battle-fit warriors, the very cream of the Arab fighting force, along with 3,000 camels, and 700 of the army, of the invading army, were fully clad in armor. And there was a cavalry of 200 horses which accompanied this invading host. On the other hand, the Muslims, which were led by Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam, were to meet this formidable force, were only 700. In fact, to begin with, Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam had mustered a force of 1,000, but 300 of these were led by Abdullah bin Ubay bin Sulul, and they were his followers. And from my study of the history of that period, I am quite convinced that Abdullah bin Ubay bin Sulul was in conspiracy with the Meccans, and it was already pre-planned that while the Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be leading the Muslim army to the battlefield, halfway between he would withdraw, or reaching there he would withdraw immediately, so that the rest should be unnerved and lose heart in the battle, and suddenly they would feel further weakened against an already formidable enemy. So that is exactly what happened. So Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam was left with only 700. He had only 2 horses as compared to the 200 horses of the invading force. And 100 somehow had got armor, and they were clad in armor out of the 700. Now, Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed the greatest skill, apart from being a great prophet, of course, the greatest of prophets, I should say, a great skill as being a general, to lead an army with all odds against him. And the way he skillfully handled the battle and the strategy he's adopted is amazing. First of all, he himself thought that he should wait for the enemy to attack Medina and enter Medina. Now this strategy was of course superior, because he had already secured the support of all the Medinites, whether they were Muslims or not, through the covenant which I have mentioned earlier. So the covenant would immediately go into effect if Medina was attacked. And in an army which defends from the city, which is so well known to it, while it is the map of the city and the streets and things are unknown to the invading army, in itself is a great advantage. Then it was pointed out that women could also participate in defending the town by pelting stones on the invaders, and a great confusion could be caused by the invading men. They had to spread out according to the streets, and they could be thrown into great confusion. So this was the strategy of Muhammad. But the youth of that period was rather too hot-blooded. Particularly the Ansar youth were very, very restive. One of the reasons why they had become restive and hot-blooded was that Abu Sufyan, instead of attacking Medina from the side of Mecca, had encamped his army on the opposite side towards the mount or hills of Uhud. Uhud is situated across Medina, looking from Mecca, and it's on the other side. According to some authorities, 3 3.75 miles, about 4 miles north of Medina. So instead of attacking Medina from the south, he detoured and went across to occupy the fields between Medina and the hills. One of the purposes was to destroy the corn crop which was ready for reaping, sowed by belonging to the Ansar, who were of course farmers by profession. So Abu Sufyan, with such a large army and animals to feed, immediately started destroying the crops and eating them up, or feeding them to the cattle, to the camels and the horses. Now this left the Ansar very restless, because they knew all the food for the year would be destroyed in a matter of a day or so if they permitted them to remain there as such. So the Muhammad ultimately gave in to the youth's advice and said, all right, if you must insist. The argument on their side was that if we do not attack them now, not only will they destroy our crops, but we will be taken to be nincompoops, spineless people by the tribes around. We lose our prestige in the sight of the nomads and Arab tribes. And they would say all their crops were being destroyed before their eyes, and they didn't move. So they are the pinkest people on earth, that sort of thing. And they said, we can't tolerate that. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave in to that sort of pressure and said, all right. Now why? I think by implication. It was not in so many words, but by implication it was suggested that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was afraid of going out, leading the army into the open, and was avoiding this. I personally feel that this must have hurt Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he would have said, all right, if that is what you mean, I am more daring than you are, and the battle which was to follow, exactly proved this, as we will see further. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's strategy at that time was also fascinatingly superior to the strategy of Abu Sufyan. Instead of attacking Abu Sufyan's force from Medina's side, which appeared to be natural, they could retreat and withdraw to Medina easily. He made a detour and went to the mountainside opposite Medina, and apparently left Medina defenseless, luring Abu Sufyan and daring Abu Sufyan to leave the army alone on the other side and attack Medina. So why did he adopt this policy? I personally believe that apart from other things, he must have suspected that the Munafiqeen of Medina and the Jews of Medina had already gone into a conspiratorial this contract with the invading army, that you don't invade Medina, otherwise we'll have to fight on the side of the Muslims. And also, of course, we'll be afraid for our own women and children and properties, and we could not trust you that much. So we'll keep aloof and neutral as long as you do not enter Medina. Now, for him to go to the other side of Medina was also a sign of cleverness of Abu Sufyan. Number one, he could reach the crops from the north, while on the south there were no crops. And secondly, he believed that being smaller in number, the Muslims would be tempted to fled easily and take flight at the greater odds against them. They will be overawed. So with their houses at their back, it will be far easier for them to run away. So that would be a weakening factor for them, in fact. And as in flight, we could destroy them as at our will. Now this again proved to be a correct assessment by Abu Sufyan, as the other events would reveal later on. I'll tell you how it proved to be correct. But Anzar Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam completely turned the tables against him by taking a position from there Muslims could not take flight at all, but also had the advantage of having a safe back of the mountains, from the mountainside. If your back is safe and you are smaller in number, you gain a very obvious and positive advantage. But he did it so cleverly that until he had occupied the whole position, the invading army could not judge his move, and they were completely surprised. Next morning, he left late in the afternoon, knowing that it will take long time for the whole army to move, so he made a slow move until night befell. And under the cover of the night, he had the advantage of moving to the other side of the invading army and occupy a position of strategic importance to him. That showed that he had burned his boats. He had committed all his army to the last, he himself inclusive, and told them that we don't care for you. Do whatever you may please, but we are not afraid of you. Now this advantage, in fact, was the strategic move, in fact, was responsible for the initial defeat of the invading army. What happened was that Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew that their backs were safe as long as the cavalry of the invading army did not attack them from the small what they call darra, the passes. There were small passes, 1 or 2 passes in the mountains through which a fast-moving cavalry could come back and attack from behind the forces of Islam. So Anzar sallallahu alaihi wasallam posted a small but very effective and powerful band of archers. According to some historians, the number was 50. I think most are agreed that they were total of 50 archers, which were posted on strategic passes from where the enemy could attack the back of the Muslims. And he instructed them not to leave the place, whatever may happen. He was so clear-sighted that he even envisaged the time of Muslim victory when everybody would be indulged in plundering and gathering whatever he can, and they are being tempted at that time to leave the passes on the presumption that everything was over and the battle is won. So Hazrat Rasulullah Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam included in his instructions this scenario. He said, I tell you not to leave this place, even if the battle is completely won on our side, even if everything is over, you remain seated here. But unfortunately, this is what they did not do, and some put the blame on the leader, but some say no, he was adamant, he said no, I will not leave the place, whatever may happen. But during the first onslaught of the Muslim warriors, this overwhelmingly greater army and stronger, well-trained army of the Arabs, of the Meccans, took to flight. And there was complete chaos in the arrays of the invading forces, and there was great confusion. And this much is even admitted by venomous anti-Islamic writers like Mr. Montgomery Watt. He said at least one thing was proved, that in ground battle, the Muslims were superior to the invading host of Abu Sufyan. But at the same time, he simply cannot understand why even initially Muslims gained victory. 700 against a well-trained army of 3,000 invaders, with 200 mounted cavalrymen and 3,000 camels to support. It's unbelievable, unthinkable how it could happen. So, to reduce the effect of this great victory as to appear to somebody as miraculous or having been achieved with the help of Allah, he juggles with the numbers. And you will be surprised to read what he writes about the number. He says, perhaps we have every reason to believe that the number on the side of Hazrat Muhammad was around 2,000. So it bridges the gap between 700 and 3,000 to just a mere 2 to 3 ratio, by imagining things, while no historian has mentioned this figure at all. There is no reason, no ground whatsoever for this wild conjecture on his part that the number of Muslim army was 2,000. I read from him. He says, it does perhaps give us some justification. Look at the words and the absurdity of this expression. It does perhaps give us some justification for thinking that Muhammad may have had about 2,000 men that day. Such a weak sentence, telltale at every point that the man is a liar, is concocting things, he has no ground whatsoever. So all is full of doubt upon doubt upon doubt. Look at the word perhaps. Some justification. What justification? No, nothing is mentioned. For thinking, you see, still you are, after everything, you are still in a position to think, not to ascertain anything, that Muhammad may have had. I have never read any other statement where doubt upon doubt is piled so into such a tall building of imagination as Montgomery has managed to do. So even in apparent defeat, as they claim, the enemies are still today not satisfied at what happened. They can't understand what happened. And when we will return to the verses, then you will know what had happened actually. So the ferocity of the attack, the power of the attack was so overwhelming that all historians have to admit that in the first part of the battle, the enemy was left with no choice but to take to flight. At that time, some of the invading Muslims lost discipline and control and started collecting the leftovers in the battlefield, arms, etc., whatever was left in a hurriedly retreating army. By a hurriedly retreating army. Now this, when observed from the vantage point of those who were appointed by Muhammad to occupy the weak spots from where the enemy could attack from behind, that temptation of plunder and things, spoils I should say, not plunder, spoils of the war, was too much for them. So a large part from among them left the post. As far as I remember, I have not refreshed my memory, but as far as I remember, the leader with 10 of his followers remained adamant not to leave, but the 40 odd from among others left their post, the passes. Now Khalid bin Walid at that time was on the invading side. He was a very shrewd warrior and soldier, and he saw his opportunity, and because he was leading the cavalry, so he ordered all the 200 horses to follow him, make a sharp, quick detour, and fall upon the Muslim army from back of the mountain, reaching the excesses of the passes, and then descending heavily and suddenly on the Muslim army, which was already indisciplined and in disarray. So that is exactly what happened. So the defeat was not, in fact, in reality, the defeat of Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his followers, but the defeat was that of those 50 archers. Faith, their loyalty to Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam and their loyalty to their supreme commander, which resulted in this reversal of the outcome of the battle. Now this leaves us with a very grave lesson, never to be forgotten again. God is on the side of those who fight on his side for his cause, but only if they follow the instruction and obey the authority created by God. The moment they disobey the authority, they no longer remain recipient of Allah's blessing and his succor. So on that day, this was the lesson which was delivered home to the Muslims. Okay, look here, just one single mistake has completely turned the tables from your favor to the favor of the invaders. Now what followed was a very, very sad and tragic event, but at the same time still more puzzling for the enemies of Islam. This should have caused a complete defeat to the Muslims, and it should have caused irreparable damage to the Muslim army, because the cavaliers suddenly taken Muslims by surprise from behind they in disarray, Abu Sufyan leading back his army knowing what had happened, and sandwiching the Muslims from all sides. Well, they were not in any more battle formation. That could have completely ruined and should have apparently destroyed the army and annihilated the Muslims one and all. But after the dust of the war is settled, the figures we discover are this: 70 losses on the Muslim side and 23 losses on the enemy side. If there were 2,000, even then 70 losses is just negligible. But out of 700, a small army of 700, to lose only 70, while to find oneself in such a precarious, impossible situation, must have happened because of very special, miraculous aid from God. Otherwise, it's inexplicable. And this happened also at a period when it was announced by the enemy that Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam had become the victim of the battle. He had died. Now this announcement had a devastating effect on the Muslims of different types. Some of them started leaving the battlefield. How they could do, I can't understand even then. They were sandwiched between the invading cavaliers and the invading army mounted on camel or on foot. And somehow the enemy was blinded. This is the only explanation, that they were left to return. Some decided to return back to their original positions. They were saved. But some who decided to return to Medina, it were they who were mostly destroyed and killed. So as far as the battlefield is concerned, the loss on the Muslim side was minimal, because even the Western scholars like Montgomery Watt, who does not want to give any credit whatsoever to Muslim side, admits that most of the victims on the Muslim side were from that party which according to him was almost annihilated, which was returning back to their homes to Medina. So they were the ones who were in flight, the only ones. Although the justification is offered that after the loss of the so-called loss of Muhammad, they thought everything was lost. But still, a large party from among the Muslims remained steadfast and faithful, and they did not either leave the battlefield or did not leave the arms, lay down the arms either. Because there is a third party mentioned in the history, which a third party not as a band of people, but a third section, let's say, of various Muslim individuals, soldiers, who decided that after Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam there is no point to live. So severally, individually, they rushed madly at the enemies, knowing that it was no way they could defeat the force or cause any damage, but only they were playing with their own life. So they did it, and it is reported that somebody was sitting, having got tired. You know, the battle style in those days was different from the battle style of today. People fought, and when they got tired, they found some quiet place for a respite, and even carried some dates in their pockets to refresh themselves, to regain their lost energy. So one of them is reported to be eating such dates, quietly at one corner. Some people were rushing past him, returning to their original battle positions or whatever direction it was, and he inquired, what's happened? He said, Rasulullah Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has been killed in the battle. He had only one date left. He looked at the date, addressed the date, said, you are the only thing between me and martyrdom. After Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there is no meaning to live, no meaning to life. He chucked the date away and attacked the enemy and got quartered to pieces. So many daring feats of such nature are reported, and to the extreme annoyance of the modern Western historians, they go on objecting against this battle. They say there is so much detail mentioned about individual behavior, unnecessary, uselessly. They go on, the historians of Muslim analysts go on telling what happened to that man, what happened to that man, what was he doing and what was he doing at the period. So, because it was far more important to the Muslims to speak of the quality of Muslim faith. It was not a battle between two territorial armies. It was a fight between the faith and infidelity to God, faithlessness on the other side. So what they were concerned was not a defeat on the battlefield, a physical defeat, but a defeat of the morale, of the faith, of the message of Islam. So this is why they have taken great care in describing as far as possible in detail the individual reactions of people, what he was doing, Hazrat Ali reports, for instance, as against the Shia allegation that Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar also took to flight, that the first people who reached there and who were around Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam at the time of extreme crisis were Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar. So this is, I'll tell you the name of the history which mentions this. I have got somewhere the reference. Anyway, let's continue to describe what happened. So, after all this, Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was discovered from under the bodies. I mean, he himself, I think, came to and regained his consciousness, and he stood there, but he would not take a step back. He was alone. Then started the mad rush backwards. That is what turned the table again in favor of Islam. The enemy had thought that everything on the Muslim side was lost when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was killed. All the Muslims had lost their faith and will to fight, and they had dispersed. But once the word passed around that Muhammad ﷺ was alive, the people who were running away, they returned with a mad rush to the spot. And suddenly a formidable force began to build around Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And they fought with such ferocity that Abu Sufyan and his companions decided not to continue fighting with them anymore. And they retreated themselves to a safe distance and permitted them to retreat to their original position of the on the slightly higher on the hillside. There were many crevices and natural protections there which the hill provided to the army. So Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam returned to one of the caves, large caves, along with his close companions who were with him all the time. At that time, Abu Sufyan, still believing that Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had got killed ultimately, because it was so reported by a person who said, I have killed him myself with my own hands. In fact, he had injured him very grievously, but of course God had promised him that he would not be killed at the hands of his enemies, so he was saved. But Abu Sufyan, working under the same impression, knowing where they had taken shelter, yet not daring to attack them again, approached that place and at the top of his voice shouted, "Where is so and so?" naming some Muslim warriors, and daring them to speak and reveal their position. And at every silence that followed the challenge, he shouted that we have won. The words to the effect, shouted something in jubilation that, "Look here, where is he? No more." While most of them were sitting with Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He kept on doing it, and Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam at every shout from Abu Sufyan, silenced the Muslims who were with him. He knew it was the Arab temperament, not to pocket insult. So he was afraid that they would shout back, "Yes, we are here." So he told them, just silence them by the sign of the hand. No answer. But when it came to Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself, and in the end he said, "Where is Muhammad?" It was impossible for Hazrat Umar to withhold any more. And before he could be silenced by Hazrat, he said, "He is here alive with us." So Abu Sufyan was surprised. He said, "Is it Umar?" He understood, he recognized the voice. "Is it Umar who is speaking?" He said, "Yes, I am alive, hale and hearty. Also, our master, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, is also alive." So he said, Kamiya, what was it? Ibn Kamiya. He said, "Ibn Kamiya has reported to me that he killed him. But I trust you more than Ibn Kamiya. Umar, if you are saying it, I'll believe you." But then he said, "Olo Hubal, Olo Hubal." As we say, Masih Maud ki, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad ki Jai. Olo means that extol the glory of Hubal, the imaginary god the Meccans worship. At that time, Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam shouted. He said, "This is the time to answer. Why are you quiet now?" No concern for personal safety at that time mattered anymore. If God's name was insulted and challenged, then what does the human life matter, even if it's the Prophet, the best of prophets? So he said, "Shout back." And then all of them shouted back, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Ala wa Ajal, Allahu Ala wa Ajal." God is greatest. God is the most sublime. And that, there was something in that shout, some determination, some will to fight to the end for the honor of unity of God. That depressed Abu Sufyan, and he decided to retreat and leave the matter there. Now, still it is inexplicable. A small band of Muslims surrounded by all sides, taking shelter in a somewhat small cave, at their mercy. And they had come all the way 250 or thereabout miles with the intention to kill Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this is exactly what is accepted by all the modern scholars as well. The main intention of the invasion was to kill once and for all Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and do away with the, as they call, the nuisance of Islam. And there he was, himself revealing his position, and a very weak position for that matter. And when they shouted back, "Allahu Ala wa Ajal," and awe was stricken on their minds, somehow they were terrified, and they decided to retrieve rather than to risk another skirmish with these people. So that is how they returned. But as I have mentioned, when the dust of the battle settled down, what we see revealed is so small by way of damage to the Muslims. No prisoners, no more than 70 dead. How could it happen? The verses of the Holy Quran will explain how it could happen, which I am going to recite. وَإِذْ هَمَّتْ طَائِفَتَانِ مِنْكُمْ أَن تَفْشَلَا وَاللَّهُ وَلِيُّهُمَا وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. The crisis was further complicated, according to the Quran, by the fact that two of the parties from among the Muslims at that period of crisis had almost deserted. Wallahu waliyuhuma, despite the fact that they knew that God was on their side. God was their mentor, God was their friend. So such was the difficulty, the seriousness of the overwhelming power of non-Muslims' onslaught, that even believers who knew all the time that God was theirs, was on their side, had almost deserted. Is hammat ta'ifatun means they had already decided, but they did not, they could not desert. Somehow Allah saved them. So in this sense, the verse should be understood in two ways. Number one, when two parties from among the Muslims had decided to desert, Wallahu waliyuhuma, but because Allah was their friend, God saved them from this disgrace. And the other meaning would be, they had almost deserted, they had decided to desert despite the fact that they knew Allah was on their side. وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Whatever the crisis, whatever the situation, the true believers have full faith in Allah's help, and they don't turn to anybody else. They have complete faith, tawakkul, on God and His powers. Now this is a very interesting event which has been referred to, and the people, who were the people mentioned, has been recorded by history. عن جابر بن عبد الله يقول فينا نزلت إذ همت طائفتان منكم أن تفشلا والله وليهما قال نحن الطائفتان بنو حارثة وبنو سلمة وما نحب وقال سفيان مرة وما يسرني أنها لم تنزل بقول الله والله وليهما. It means that Jabir bin Abdullah reports that this verse was revealed in application to the tribe, to the section of the tribe to which Jabir bin Abdullah also belonged. So he said it was revealed about us. We were the two sections, Banu Harisa and Banu Salma, belonging to Khazraj and Aus, two major tribes of Medina. He said we should not have liked the fact that this verse was revealed about us, because it's very disgraceful for any party to desert or think of deserting. But for the last bit, where Allah says, Wallahu waliyuhuma, God saves our face and honor by saying that He is our friend. So at another time, somebody was boasting this verse was about us. Somebody said, shame on you. It tells of your treachery, your cowardice, your decision to desert, and you say proudly it's about us. He said, we would never have revealed this but for the last bit. If we cover this part, the last part would also be covered. But it's too good for us to hide. When Allah says, after all we did, I am still your friend, then we must fully possess that honor and declare to the world that whatever we did, still Allah was our friend. So it was this last bit which made us confess that this verse was revealed about us. Now, there are two reports, one by Tabri, very authentic book of history, which speak of Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar. Hazrat Abu Bakr, the role of Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar in that battle, it says, reporting from Abu Bakr himself, that on the day of Uhud, when everybody got scattered and Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam was left alone, it was I who reached him for the first, and then gradually people started gathering around him. Tarikh Tabri, that is the book of Tabri, on its own reports that when Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam got injured, the first two people who reached him bearing flags in their hands were Abu Bakr and Umar. In another authentic book, Tarikhul Khulafa, it is reported from Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He says, I swear by God that except for Abu Bakr, none was closer to Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time of serious crisis from among us. Hazrat Abu Bakr stood guard over him throughout with his sword, unsheathed sword. Now, why I have reported this to you is that the Shiites generally allege that at the time of Battle of Uhud, both Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar had deserted Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was only Hazrat Ali who was brave enough to weather the storm and to remain steadfast. Now, one can understand why Hazrat Ali was not closer to Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That there is no problem about that. He was the greatest warrior of the time of Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In battlefield, he had no match, and it was he who claimed the greatest number of victims from the other side in every battle. If you read the facts of all the battles of the time of Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the greatest number of infidels killed at the hand of those involved in those battles belonged to Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And the second man was nowhere nearer. The large gap between him and the next man reported. So he was busy in the battlefield throughout. This was his career. So it is not a reflection on him that he was not closer than Hazrat Abu Bakr was, but he must have occasionally cast a searching glance at the place where Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, lest he would be needed there. So during those glances, he must have noticed that whenever he looked back, there was Abu Bakr and Umar, or Abu Bakr, he reports only Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr was always there. If anybody else was there or not, this is immaterial. Abu Bakr was always there. So in the face of this irrefutable testimony of Hazrat Ali, how can the Shiites maintain that Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar were among those who had fled the battlefield? The rest is just routine things, explanations of the verse which I have found among other books of commentary, which are explanations regarding things which are apparent, only explained in other words. So there is nothing more to explain regarding this verse. I mean, there would be other things, of course, in the context of what precedes and what follows in the context of other meanings which are contained by these verses. They're not just a narration of what happened during some battles. The verses of the Holy Quran carry so many messages, and there are many underlying threads of meaning connected with each other. So I don't mean that all the meanings of this verse are exhausted. What I mean to say is, as far as the Battle of Uhud is concerned, I have searched in the commentaries. I don't find anything of substance to report to you other than this controversy about who was where and who was there, and that's all. And what was worthy of mention about the position of Prophet and the outcome of the battlefield, I have already explained to you. So tomorrow, inshallah, we will take up the next verse. وَلَقَدْ نَصَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ. It's time for prayer, isn't it? Yes. And if I have left anything out of the notes, you better remind me. You can always return back to it. Okay?